So, yung first pattern, which is yung round glow density, kay good siya for visible via larva siya with no inflammation. Then yung second is, ginagamit naman siya pag dead larva. Then yung third is kung yung for dead scolex. Next slide, please. Okay. So, sa ano naman tayo, ophthalmic cysticercosis naman can be diagnosed through visualization of the cysticerci using ophthalmoscopy. So, sa eyes ito siya ng kanang ma-fall. Then, during sa diagnosis na to, no? So, yung makita na cysticerci, yung movement niya like during the procedure, it may induce movement or evagination of the scolex. Kaya minsan, like, mahirap siya i-visualize or para mahanap. Next, we have muscular or subcutaneous cysticerci that are usually palpable and can be recovered through tissue biopsy or histopathology processing. Next, we have serologic tests, include serum and CSF, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay or the ELISA, and electroimmunotransfer blot or the EITB or the Western blot for specific IG and IgM of anti-cysteral antibodies. So, yung ELISA and EITB, so this test has sensitivity about 75 to 100%, usually partially purified glycoprotein antigen to detect antibodies. So, parang ginalagyan siya ng. So, next, meron tayong ELISA test, which is very good screening test for cysticercosis that uses crude antigen from the cysticerci obtained from pigs. So, in recent studies, they are looking into the use of antigen B of cysticercosis cellulose as useful antigen in diagnosis. So, next slide, please. Treatment. Okay, treatment. So, treatment. So, first is for teniasis naman muna. So, we have praziquantel and nicotinamide as drug of choice. So, mga 5 to 10 mg or single dose for both adults and children for praziquantel. Then the treatment should not be delayed because the possible of autoinfection and subsequent cysticercosis. Dapat tuloy-tuloy siya. Para hindi good maglala or mag-lay pa something egg. Next, criteria for cure. So, malalaman if yung patient that is like ma-cure siya ba, like recovery, ganyan. So, the recovery of scolex is, and sunod is negative stool examination 3 months after the treatment. So, next slide. Cysticercosis. Okay. So, cysticercosis. So, una is parenchymal cystic lesion. So, again, meron tayong praziquantel, pero dose niya is 50 to 75. That is divided into 3 doses for 30 days. Then, meron tayong albendazole. Dose niya is 400 mg twice daily. So, for 8 to 30 days. Then, corticosteroids naman are given either 80 mg of prednisone or mga 10 mg na iron dexamethasone mga 4 hours after last dose. So, dito sa parenchymal form ng mga lesion, minsan kasi merong massive good na yung patient natin is parang marami na ba, like acid na yung parasitic infection niya. So therefore, yung cortisone na therapy na mention, it can be given high dose, no? In cases, especially kung na-increase yung intracranial niya o merong intracranial pressure. And then, may mga studies din na or like pwede rin ang parasequentel or albendazole in cases of as part ng treatment. Next, meron tayong subarachnoid form. So, una is surgical. So, surgical for removal of lesions and ventricular forms. Then, albendazole therapy again. A dose is 10 to 15 for 8 days. So, kung ventricular naman, kung di ba nakalagay surgical forms or removal of lesions kung mayroong vertical forms, yun talaga yung parang best option na para ma-remove yung cyst. Next, we have ocular cysterosis. Must undergo surgical before magbigay ng parasequental or albendazole. Then, kung meron siyang symptomatic cyst outside CNS or central nervous system, it must be surgical removed. So, yun ang advice. So, next. Okay. So, the habit of consuming raw or inadequately prepared meat is strongly linked to the spread of Taenia solium and Taenia saginata infection. So, abstinence from beef is a religious belief among Hindus that prevents Taenia saginata infection. So, um, yun kasi yung parang nagka-cause ng sagitana infections kasi ang pagkakaiba lang nila is ang sagitana sa tama ba? Yes, sa beef, and then si solium sa pigs siya. So, while abstinence of pork sa mga Muslims natin, so of course, di sila makakuha nito ang solium infection. So, the level of environmental sanitation practice in the area determines how well the life cycle in nature is maintained. So, the prevention control, although cooking is meat, true cooking of meat is primary measure, then the meat inspection of all, like yung pagpatay ng pigs, o paano pagpatay ng cows or cattle, especially yung liver, kailangan like, parang malinis siya pa. Kaya, syempre, di ba sa contaminated, di ba? Tapos fecal oral route pa yung ano natin for both sagitana and solium. So, aside from cooking, no, na cook talaga, I'm explain later kung ilan yung nun. Then, din, like, yun nga, yung sanitary, especially sa mga slaughtered na mga, sa mga slaughtered industry, like yung mga cows, yung cattle, and liver, no, kailangan talaga na malinis yung pagpatay nila bakay para pag nag-consume, especially ng mga tao na kumakain nito, of course, safe sila. Next slide. Okay. Okay, Asiatica. Okay. So, on behalf of Miss Marceliana, so babasahin ko yung nabigay niya na notes about this. Okay. So, Taenia asiatica was discovered at the end of the last century in Taiwan. Then the parasite is much closer to Taenia sagittana than Taenia solium. So, morphologically, the eggs of Taenia asiatica cannot be distinguished from those of other taenids, including the sagitana and the solium. So the scolex and the proglottids of these three tapeworms, especially species, can be differentiated morphologically, but it is rather difficult. So the common name is the Asian fork tapeworm that is reported in Taiwan, Korea, and Indonesia. So general morphology, we have habitat, the cysticerci, which is located primarily in the liver of the intermediate host. And the intermediate host naman natin ay si um, Cysticerci viscerotropica, which is found in pigs, cattle, goats, wild boars, and monkeys. So it is a affinity for visceral organs. So pigs led to the name of metacystode. So Cysticercus viscerotropica, this tapeworm is characterized by viscerotrophism, which is attached to the visceral tissue like liver, and in its larval stage, it is distinct from solium and sagittana, which display musculotropism, which means it attached to muscular tissue. So definitive host is human or yung adult worms. Okay, next slide. Hmm, okay. So sa adult, meron tayong length na 4 to 80 meters. Then meron tayong 300 to 1,000 segments. The scolex naman contains rostellium or Tenyasolium-like, but no hooks, katulad ng Tenia sagittana. So the body of Tenia asiatica is yellowish to white in color, with scolex, which is the head of Tenia asiatica, that contains structures such as grooves, suckers, or hooks, which enable the worm to attach to the gut wall. So yung scolex ng Tania asiatica, they have 4 suckers, but no hooklets. It has more or less elevated rostellium. And just refer to picture A. So sa proglottids naman, as new proglottids are formed from the neck region, they push the older ones progressively posterior, creating a chain of proglottids or the strobila. So the sexual process of forming segments is termed strobilation. So the strobila or the strobilation can loosely subdivide into region, which is the immature, mature, and gravid proglottids. So kung nasabi natin siya na mature proglottids kapag the segment of the tapeworm containing both male and female reproductive organs. So the tama. So the mature proglottids contain male or female reproductive. So the number of testes is 324 to 1,000 to 1,216. And then yung ovary niya may 2 lobes. Next, meron din siyang vaginal sphincter which is present. And for gravid proglottids naman, there are proglottids na merong mature eggs which break off at the end of the worm and enter the environment with the feces of the host. So number of unilateral uterine branches is about 11 to 32. Then the branching pattern is dichotomous. So next slide, please. So sa larva naman, meron tayong Cysticercus or the C. viscerotropica. So because of this tapeworm is characterized by viscerotrophism, which is attached dun sa visceral tissue, likely sa liver yung kanyang larval stage. So localization is liver. It can be omentum or serosa or sa lungs din. Then meron tayong sister C of Tanium asiatica that are much smaller than those sorghum at kay Sagitana. And ang sister sini asiatica may develop in 4 weeks. They are wart-like pro, pro, protube, protuberances on external surface, then invaginated scolex armed with vestigial hooklets. So sa eggs naman, eggs ng Tenya species are indistinguishable from each other as well as some other members of Tenidae, and the eggs measure 30 to 35 micrometers in diameter and radically striated. Okay. Epidemiology. So si Asistica natin is endemic in Korea, China, Taiwan, and Indonesia. Eating raw and uncooked pig liver is the cause of being infected with Taenia asiatica. So it was first discovered in Taiwan, other than East Asian countries. So it is closely related to yun nga, kay Sagitana, and it is once thought to be distinct strain. So this tapeworm is derived from pigs rather than cattle. Next slide, please. Pathogenesis. Okay. So in pigs, cysticercus tends to produce cysticercosis. So the cysts formed in vital organs such as liver and lungs. So in humans, Taenia cystica causes intestinal infection. When humans infected with this worm can be asymptomatic or having a mild gastrointestinal symptoms. So there are mga less frequent symptoms naman, yung weight loss, loss of appetite, stomach discomfort, gastric pain, nausea, paraenal pruritus or the itchy anus. It is frequent symptom that characterized by severe itch in the perianal region between the buttocks, and of course having proglottids in feces. So when a person is affected by Asiatica or Taenia asiatica, the proglottids in the eggs are excreted in the feces. So people who have this illness may observe proglottic segments in their stools or feel proglottid movement in the perianal area. So next slide, please. So life cycle niya. So life cycle niya, ang Taenia asiatica can be indirect and digenetic. So humans are the definite host and pigs as intermediate hosts. So the life cycle is similar to the Taenia species na it only differs to the infective stage of cysticercise that residing in the liver of the pig. So the life cycle is shortest than Solium and Sagitana. Some humans become infected by larvae known as cysticercus by ingesting no? or raw or liver ng pig. So una, sa life cycle natin, meron tayong yung eggs or the gravid proglottids is passed on the environment by the feces. So the pig become infected when it will ingest vegetation that is contaminated with ova and gravid proglottids. So next is second naman is yung the in pig's intestine, the oncospheres will hatch. So the digestive enzyme of the pig will shatter in the pig shell, allowing the creation of zygotes or the oncosphere dun sa pig, no? So it will penetrate the mucus of the pig's intestine. Then yung third step naman, it will eventually invade the intestinal wall and migrate to the liver, where they develop into sister C or SI within 1 to 2 months after ingestion of the eggs. So in its larva stage, it produces the pea size or the fluid-filled cyst known as cysticercus. Then this will migrate to visceral organs of the pig, such as the liver. Then the larval development takes 4 weeks. So, pang-apat naman is human becomes infected by ingesting raw or uncooked liver. So, in human small intestine, in human small intestine, the sister cruise develop over 2 months into an adult tapeworm, and which can survive for years. So, the mature worm will live in the small intestine and it will attach to the mucosa of the intestine with 4 suckers. So fertilizes fertilization when it reaches sexual maturity, since its mature probabilities already have its testes and ovary. So mag-self fertilization. So the fifth naman, panglima, so the adult produce proglutage which mature or become gravid, detach, then detach from tapeworm and migrate to the anus and pass into the stool. So the fertilized egg, as well as the gravid proglutage that separate from the strobila, are discharged through feces. Like it can produce 700 proglutids, or worm may be produced, 700 proglutids or worm, and may produce 8,000 eggs per proglutid. So mode of transmission niya, pigs or cattle, wild or goats can become infected by ingesting yung eggs nito, which pa nag-hatch, no, mag-release ng larvae. So in turn, they invade and develop into sister circle in the liver. So animals, including humans din, they become infected then once na ingested ito, sister circle natin. Sister circle, especially sa sa raw na liver, and the developed intestinal adult forms of infection. Next slide, please. Diagnosis. So sa diagnosis, there are significant constraint in identifying the species because all human species appear the same. So its probabilities might have its resemblance to other Taenia species. Then this also requires histological identification in order to approximately distinguish the type of Taenia. So in diagnosis, microscopic examination, again for stool, for ova and proglutids. So eggs and proglutids do not appear in the feces until 2 to 3 months after the adult tapeworm has established itself in the upper jejunum. So to improve the sensitivity of microscopic procedure, these stool samples can be taken separately days and should be examined. So ova may also present in our own anal swab. Okay, so next slide. So for treatment, praziquantel and albendazole again are commonly used to treat for cystoid infections. So si paraziquantel, effective din siya kay Asiatica, and cannot cause adverse side effects. So there's a case na doon sa Korea. So case of Taenia asiatica sa Korea, they're infected the infection detected by small bowel series of colonoscopy. Then the patient, 42-year-old Korean man, accompanied the discharge of movable proglutids via anus. So he used to eat raw pig liver, but seldom ate beef. So the small bowel series of radiologic examination showed that the flat taper feeding defect on the ileum. So by colonoscopy, a moving tapeworm has observed from thermal ileum to the ascending colon. So that tapeworm was identified Asiatica by mitochondrial DNA sequencing, and the patient is described as prescribed with single dose ng parasequentel. So, it can be also dosed, okay, can be also 5 to 10 milligrams na praziquantel. Then, alternatively, a single 2-gram dose of niclosamide, which given for tablets, mga 500 mg each, that are chewed one at a time, swallowed with small amount of water. So, for children naman, yung niclosamide is 5, ano lang, 5 mg. Then, stool should be re-examined for ova after treatment to verify the cure. So, next on slide. So, prevention. So, for prevention for Ashitika, it can be prevented by avoiding ingestion of undercooked liver and other viscera. So, through cooking, through cooking meat. So, the freezing, kung um, um, parang, ano ba ito? Nakapatay sa cysticerca is, ano niya, mga negative 20 degrees Celsius for 10 days. So, sanitary inspection and slaughtered pigs and cattle then meat inspection should be include for examination. So, so in general, so tapos na pala. In general, sa tatlong species ito, mostly makita si sagitana, or most common rather is sagitana than solium. And And there's this parang happen na nangyari or found at para ba? Basta sa Northern Luzon province, no? Northern Luzon provinces, where eating raw or undercooked meat while drinking alcohol is delicacy dun sa kanila. So, they're found na mostly neurocysticercosis yung na-report doon, and one report lang na nagkaroon ng cyster or ocular cysticercosis. So that's it. Next reporter, please. Hello, marinig po ako. Hello?
Yes, Max, pero mahina.
Hello? Marinig po. Okay na.
Mahina pa rin, Max.
Huh?
Ka na.
Okay. Ayan, okay na.
Mag-start tayo so here are our extra-intestinal cystoles. So, from the word extra-intestinal, meaning ito is outside of our intestine, and cystoles, as we have been introduced kanina, these are our tapeworms. So, our echinococcus species, our first species sa ating extraintestinal cystode. So, family, Tenidae, and order Cyclophilidae. Let's start with the general morphology of our echinococcus species. So, this causes our human echinococcosis, or also called our hydatidosis or our hydatis, which is, this one is an emerging or re-emerging zoonotic disease. There are 6 species, pero 4 yung nakalagay dito kasi these are the species which are of public health importance. So we have the E. granulosus, we have the E. multinocularis, E. vogeli, and E. oligarchus. The E. granulosus is responsible for our cystic echinococcosis. E. multilocularis is responsible for our alveolar echinococcosis. E. vogeli for polycystic and neutropical, as well as our E. oligarchus and
as well as our E. oligarchus, polycystic and neotropical din siya. Among all these species, among sa kanilang apat, ang most frequent and most common is E. granulosus. Then second to that is the E. multilocularis. And then sa E, ang rarest sa kanila lahat is itong E. oligarchus, which is extremely rare siya. Ang E. vogeli and E. oligarchus are our New World species ng ating echinococcal species. What else? Adult worm habitat, small intestine of canids. They are 3 to 6 millimeter in length, and their scolex, or yung kanilang head, as we can see dun sa illustration sa upper right, they are pyriform, meaning pear-shaped, tailed, or acetabula, and have 30 to 36 hooks. They are short neck. Yung neck nila is nasa in between yung kita natin na 1 and 2 dyan sa illustration. And then it has 3 proglottids. 3 proglotids meaning yung segments niya. Meron siyang 1 immature, which is yung 2 dyan sa illustration. And then 2, 3, 4 respectively. So 1 immature, 1 mature, then 1 ragged. Yung ragged is yung number 4, which is yung widest and longest. It has a midline uterus with lateral evaginations. Here, nakasituate yung ating eggs dyan sa uterus. We can see that sa UT dyan sa illustration. Eggs may be released inside or outside our host. Our intermediate host is acquired through ingestion. So, pag na-ingest siya ng goats, camels, horses, and sheep, and can also be accidentally ingested by humans. Among these mammals, among these mga animals nandito, ang most common is ang sheep. They hatch in the duodenum and release oncospheres, or yung kanyang larva stage, larva form rather, which penetrate the intestinal wall and migrate to mesenteric volutes, to which and lead to various organs where they lodge and develop into cysts. So among the species, ang E. granulosus is also called our dog tapeworm, and it is found worldwide, usually sa rural areas kung saan merong dogs na nag-ingest ng organs from infected animals, usually mga sheep. So, wala masyadong specific na place, or ang pag-mapping niya kung saan siya sa epidemiology niya is wala masyado, kasi hindi siya masyado na take note ang mga reported cases niya, so hirap siya i-map. Meanwhile, ang E. multilocularis naman ay usually ma-find siya sa northern hemisphere. Next. So we proceed to the larva. Larval stage is also called your hydatid cyst. E. granulosus cyst is also called your unilocular hydatid cyst. And ang E. multilocularis is also called your alveolar cyst. They grow in 1 to 5 centimeter in diameter per year, and they can be approximately 1 to 7 centimeter in diameter. Development is completed once ingested by carnivores or omnivores, and has protoscolysis, which once inside the host, evaginate and attach to the intestinal wall where they develop into adults. So itong ating meron siyang protoscolysis na kita natin sa photo. And then, ang hydatid sand natin, it consists of your protoscolysis and brood capsule. So, ating cyst, meron sa loob niya, meron siyang mga about 2 million protoscolysis. Itong protoscolysis, and naka-encapsulate yung iba sa kanila sa brood capsule. From the word brood, parang family good. Makita natin sa pic, Diyan, yung letter D, yan yung ating blood capsule. And sa loob niyan, yun yung ating mga protozoalysis. So, um, ang ating blood capsule sa loob niyan, meron siya mga daughter cyst. So, um, yan yung mga cyst natin with protozoalysis sa loob. Um, the daughter cysts are the copy of the mother cyst. So, ang hydatid sand, that's what they call yung mga protozoalysis and blood capsules na freely inside the cyst. So, kita natin free hooklets and hydatid sand doon sa, okay? Para mas maintindihan natin. Mm, Next. Let's proceed to the pathogenesis of our echinococci. So, human cystic echinococcus is caused by your developing larval cyst in the tissues of intermediate host. So, itong ating Echinococcus species, marami siyang organs na pwedeng ma-affect. But among all of those possible sites of involvement, ang liver ang 70% of cases usually occurring sa liver. Usually in the upper right lobe. Makita natin sa photo, yan yung itsura ng upper right lobe. Yung parang yellow circle. And then, sa lungs, 20 to 30% of cases, and others rise of brain and organ. Less commonly seen is sa spleen, kidneys, heart, bone, and central nervous system. So, i-explain ko why 70, bakit ganito yung percentage ng cases natin. It has something to do with the pathway of our echinococcus kasi, di ba, ang first, ang first filter na is sa liver. Once it enters our intestinal wall, it will go to our portal or parang portal venules or yung mesenteric venules na i-mention ko na. And once it enters that, mag-go siya sa parang circulation. And then, after the portal venules, ma-lead siya to the liver. And then, ma-stuck siya sa hepatic sinusoids. So, doon yung first filter nga, hence 70% ng cases, hepatic talaga or liver. Second, after niya, di ba sa liver siya, may mga ma-filter out doon sa liver. And then, mapunta siya sa right right side of the heart. Okay? Ay rather, sa second filter niya, mapunta siya sa lungs. And then, yun yung, after that, after niya ma-filter sa liver, mapunta siya sa lungs, and possibly mag-enter siya sa right side of the heart to the pulmonary capillaries. After sa pulmonary capillaries, rather, mapunta siya sa systemic circulation. Hence, yung pinaka-last na makita mo sa kanya is yung sa spleen, kidneys, heart, bone, and system. Then, our E-granulosis causes local it causes the down-regulation of our inflammatory cytokines, and these inflammatory cytokines are responsible for inflammatory response. So, doon sa area na affected, wala masyadong inflammatory response or defense against the pathogen. It also causes your organ impairment due to tissue atrophy and tissue necrosis. So, since maglaki man yung ating cyst sa loob ng mga cells, and usually kay mass man yun, diba? So, daming cells affected. Hence, mag-atrophy or mag-decrease in size ng ating tissues or yung cells natin, and also tissue necrosis or death. Hence, magkaroon tayo ng organ impairment. This can be acquired by children but often diagnosed in adults due to its slow-growing nature. So, simple and uncomplicated cysts are usually asymptomatic and may harbor for years. So, kaya siya usually sa adults lang diagnose. It's because of its slow-growing nature na pwede siyang mag-stay sa body mo ng many years. Sabi ba kung mabilis? Symptoms depend on sites of involvement. So, ang hepatic cyst natin sa liver, commonly found at the inferior right lobe, Cause siya ng hepatic enlargement, also called your hepatomegaly, right epigastric pain, and jaundice. So, since di ba ang ating liver is responsible for filtering out our bilirubin, okay, so jaundice, ang jaundice kasi high level of bilirubin. So, if hindi mo filter out ng maayos ng ating liver, kaya di ba na-damage ng ating liver, it will go to our blood, I mean our circulation. So, mag-cause siya ng jaundice, which is mag-yellow yung ating appearance ng eyes, skin also, and kasi ang bilirubin is a yellow pigment. Next, abdominal cyst. Pag masyado nang malaki yung cyst, mag-cause siya ng discomfort. Ruptured cyst due to coughing, muscle strain, trauma, aspiration, operative procedures may release yung protoscolysis, blood capsules, daughter cyst metastasize and reach other tissues. So magkaroon siya ng secondary, nakalimutan ko yung sa'yo. Pero parang secondary something. And then, sa ano, so ang mga organs na, di ba, mag-rupture, ang mga organs na pwede kung saan mapunta yung ating cyst ay sa biliary duct, bronchus, brain, and renal system. So, sa biliary duct, mag-cause ng intermittent jaundice, fever, and eosinophilia. Sa bronchus, kay ang tawag sa kanya kay peribronchial cyst, causes sudden coughing and allergic symptoms. Sa brain, kay intracranial pressure, or yung pressure sa loob ng skull. Jacksonian epilepsy, or yung partial seizure. Like, mag-start siya, mag-twitch lang yung fingers nila, or this is somewhere twitch, like sa side ng mouth nila, and then mag-elevate, or grow siya to like, whole hand nila, seizure, and then renal is sa kidney, intermittent pain, hematuria, or yung blood sa urine, and kidney dysfunction. And then, ang ma-find sa sputum is frothy blood, mucus, hydrated fluid, and bits of mildew. Check mo. So ito, wala ito siya sa book. Nahanap lang ito sa CDC, mga specific na clinical presentation. So, Echinococcus granulosus causes your fever. Urticaria is yung red itchy welts, which is, ang itchy welts is for rashes. Eosinophilia, increase in eosinophils, potentially anaphylactic shock, or yung allergic reaction, good na close yung, hindi ka rin makaginawa, close yung something. Cyst dissemination, and then sa Echinococcus frugali is slow-growing tumor, and secondary cystic development. Then sa Echinococcus multilocularis, early infection, symptoms kay slow-growing disruptive tumor, abdominal pain, biliary obstruction, and metastatic lesions. May be misdiagnosed as liver cancer, and untreated infections have a high fatality rate.
Marinig ako, guys. Hindi malakas ang electric fan.
Okay lang, ma'am.
Okay po. So, for the life cycle, so first, anuhin muna natin ang mga host ng Echinococcus species. So, dito good sa right side, so dito sa Echinococcus good, hindi ko nilagay pero ito yung common na definitive host and intermediate and accidental. So most typical na makikita ninyo itong nasa left side na part, nasa screen, which is the definitive host is the dog, intermediate sheep, cattle, goat, or kagaya nung sinabi ni Max kanina is pwede rin yung horse, basta anything na have to do with livestock animals. Then for accidental host is humans. Pero lahat ng species, yung Bolligelli, yung oligartus, then basta yung granulosus, yung specifically for the dogs, is itong nasa left side, ang common nila na host. Then, except lang dito sa multicularis na species dahil ang definitive host niya is wild animals, pero most commonly known ang red fox. Then, ang intermediate host is the rodent or yung mga mice. Kanon. Then, similar na naman sila sa accidental host is ang humans. Pero nonetheless guys, same lang pa rin ang cycle nila, pero ang pagkakaiba lang talaga is yung host. Yan. Next slide po, Max. So next is the life cycle of the Echinococcus species. So for the Echinococcus species, na yung common yung tatlo, yung Buligeli, Oligartus, and Granulosus. So ito ang life cycle nila. So for Echinococcus species, the infective stage is the embryonated eggs, and the diagnostic stage is the hydatid cyst. So first, mag-start siya sa dogs. So yung adult na Echinococcus species is mag-start siya sa intestine, then doon mag-lay siya ng embryonated eggs. Then sa number 2, dito sa 2 guys, yung parang ang sa eggs na sa number 2. Then sa number 2, dito specifically yung embryonated eggs is passed through the feces and eaten by the intermediate host or the accidental host. Pero mag-focus muna tayo sa intermediate host ha. So dito sa intermediate host, which is the sheep or the other livestock animals. So, ma-ingest nila ang embryonated eggs galing sa feces ng dogs. Kung example dito, nakain ng sheep ang feces ng dogs na infected sa adult Echinococcus species. So, for the third part, so next from the eggs, so maging oncosphere siya, ay itong oncosphere guys, yung nasa third. So ito is mag-hatch ito and penetrate to the intestinal wall. So from intestinal wall, di ba mag-attach na siya sa intestinal wall, then mag-penetrate. Then yung kagaya yung sabi kanina ni Max, yung in-explain niya, so from intestinal wall, magpunta siya sa other organs, pero most specifically sa liver. Di ba kayo na-eat naman ng kettle yung feces ng dog na may embryonated egg? So, from the intestine ng kettle, mag-penetrate, then mag-hatch, then mag-penetrate doon ang oncosphere sa intestine, then magpunta na sa other parts of the organ. Then, it will form, then next, sa number 4, next, it will form a hydatid cyst or also known din ito as thick wall cyst. Kasi nga, di ba, sa appearance, di ba, thick wall. So, para siyang balloon, guys. Para siyang balloon. So, mag-form ito siya sa organs ng kettle, pero most commonly talaga liver kasi ito yung first na filtration. First na kung asan mag-filter ang passage. So, malaki kasi ang percentage na magpunta ito sa liver, like if I'm not mistaken 10 to 80. So kung i-compare siya sa other organs na gina-infect ng hydatid cyst. Then if itong hydatid cyst is makain ng dogs, it will develop further sa loob ng dogs as protoscolex. So, ang protoscolex guys, ito yung organism na mag-form inside the cyst. So, para siyang yung sisiw sa itlog ng manok, tapos yung basta yung protoscolex, yun yung nasa loob ng organism. Then from protoscolex, maging scolex na siya, then attached to the intestine of the dog, tapos similar lang yung parang mechanism dito sa part ng oncosphere na itong scolex, mag-attach sa intestine ng dog, then magpunta naman sa other parts of the organ, then ganon. Then balik na naman sa intestine rin ng dog, mag-grow ito as an adult, then mag-lay na naman siya ng embryonated egg. So the cycle goes on lang naman. Then pag magpupo naman ang dog, makain na naman ng kettle, ang feces ng dog, then ang embryonated eggs, which is the infective stage. So magiging infected lang ang humans if and only if makakain siya accidentally ng embryonated eggs ng Echinococcus species. So hence the word accidental host kasi accidentally lang ma-ingest. So excuse me. So similar cycle lang sa accidental host na excuse me guys. Wait lang. Okay. So anyway, similar lang ang cycle. First is asan na ito? So similar lang ang cycle. So first, diba, yung accidental host, ma-ingest niya accidentally yung eggs, then mag-form siya ng oncosphere, then similar lang yung sa mechanism sa sheep kanina. So mag-attach ito sa intestinal walls, tapos mag-travel to other parts of the organs to form hydatid cysts. So anyway, makita nyo hanggang 4 lang, no? Hanggang hydatid cyst lang. Hanggang hydatid cyst lang siya sa humans kasi parang dead end na ito for humans, similar sa kung ano ba yung tawag, similar dun sa fowleri good na parasite dati. Yung dead end na ang humans. So pag infected na ang humans, di na siya maka-infect ng iba, pero pwede na lang siya malabas through surgery. So ayun, so makita ninyo dito sa may number 4 na number, parts of the organ na ma-infect niya is bone, spleen, brain, lungs, and most especially is the liver. Basta liver talaga ang bias ng Echinococcus species, guys. Sa liver talaga siya. Next slide po, Max. So ito naman is multilocularis na species, specific species ng specific species. So sa multilocularis or yung rodent, 'di ba, ang intermediate host. So 'di ba yung sa general kanina, yung sa dogs is yung tatlo yung na species, pero dito yung multilocularis is yung specific sa rodent. So for multilocularis, similar lang ang life cycle nila kung i-compare siya dun sa previous na life cycle kanina. Pero ang pagkakaiba lang is yung host, which is the definite host and the intermediate host. The definite host is the fox, jaguar, and other animals, pero nakafocus siya mostly sa young red fox. Then, ang intermediate host niya is rodent. Then, similar lang naman na may accidental host, ang accidental host is humans. So, makita ninyo dito sa part good sa life cycle, ma-ingest ng humans ang embryonated eggs, then mag-form ito ng an oncosphere na naman, then which is mag-attach na naman sa intestine ng humans. Then dito mag-iba na siya to the previous kasi ang gina-focus lang ng multilocularis is the liver lang, and compare kanina, 'di ba, marami pang parts yan, like magpunta pa siya sa spleen, sa bones, sa brain, sa lungs. So eto guys, so mag-form lang talaga siya sa liver. So pero baka malito kayo, ha, like baka mag-ask kayo, uy Antoinette, bakit sabi mo sa liver lang ang multilocularis, tapos ang nakalagay dito sa taas kay alveolar echinococcus. So dito sa upper part guys, yung sa upper part talaga, itong alveolar echinococosis, tinawag lang yung alveolar because of solely the appearance of the cyst, hindi dahil sa lung siya mag-infect. Kasi, like, itong, di ba dito, like, dito go sa number 4 na figure, dito sa cyst niya, di ba, alveolar cyst, di ba, similar siya sa alveolar yang niya sa, go sa lungs natin. Oo. So, tinawag lang siyang alveolar solely because of the appearance. Apo. Basta, ang dalawa guys, yung Echinococcus species na general, yung tatlo, at itong Echinococcus multicularis is specifically sa liver talaga sila. So, next slide po, Max. So, ito pala ang sample, ito ang sample guys ng mga picture. So, sa A and B, ito yung hydrated cyst. So, makita nyo, sabi ko sa inyo parang balloon kanina. So, parang balloon talaga siya sa loob yan ng sa liver. Oo po. Tapos, sa letter C is layer wall of hydrated cyst. So, ito yung layer ng wall ng hydrated cyst na pinakita rin ni Max kanina. Then, ito, these collects with a row of hooklets. Ay, hindi ko nasabi kanina guys, pero kaya pala mag-penetrate easily ang scolex at ano yun? Ayan, basta yung scolex kasi because of the presence of its hooklets. Yun. Next slide po, Max. So next slide po is for diagnosis, is radiographic findings and or ultrasonography, history of residence or travel in endemic area, and association with dogs. So ito, vital po ito or important part to detect and diagnose the cyst. So magamit ito ng correlation rather dito in diagnosis. Kung wari, alamin muna kung may aso ba ang patient or naka-abroad siya sa ibang bansa or naka-travel siya in endemic area. Yan. Tapos, kasi mahirap talagang i-trace ang hydrated cyst or yung alveolar cyst kasi parang later on pagod sila pag malaki na talaga ang cyst, doon pa maglabas ang mga symptoms nila na gisabi ni Max kanina, like yung nasa previous slide na gisabi ni Max. So next is screening test, 60 to 90% sensitivity, including indirect hemagglutination, indirect fluorescence antibody, and enzyme immunoassay. Note, highlight, sensitivity may vary depending on the location. So, kasi itong effectiveness nito is most likely naga-focus sa liver kasi nga 'di ba bias ang Echinococcus species sa liver kasi ito ang first filter niya. So ang serologic test na ito ay nakafocus talaga sa liver detection kung nasa liver ba ang cyst. So, kaya ang serologic test minsan, kung magpa-test ka, tapos may times na ma-false negative siya depending on the location. Opo. Tapos, next, the gold standard for serology, detection of IgG antibodies to hydrated cyst, fluid-derived native or recombinant antigen B subunit through ELISA or immunoblot. So, ito yung gold standard for serologic test of Echinococcus hydrated cyst detection. Next slide po. So, hindi ko na, wala ito sa books guys, pero di ko na explain further, pero kasi matagalan na. Pero, kumari itong sa others, itong PCR, di ba? PCR, alam naman natin na ang PCR is ginagamit for paramihin or amplifying. So, it is very useful especially pag wala sa liver ang hydrated cyst. So, para to ease ang pag-diagnose ng patient. So next slide po. So ito po ang uh, WHO standardized classification for hepatic cyst detection gamit ang ultrasonography. So di ko nabasahin guys ha, since maliit na yung oras, since nasa libro lang naman. So ito uh, So, in general explanation, di ba, vital man ang ultrasonography and detection of cysts. So, nagawa ng classification ang WHO para mapabilis ang detection and diagnosis ng hydatid cysts at malaman nila kung ano ang gagawin when it comes to treatment at kung kailangan ba talaga ng surgery or extraction ng cyst. So, next slide po. So, ito ang picture ng ultrasonography ng hydatid cysts, guys, based on sa classification nila. So, example na lang dito yung yung sa second column yung CE1, 'di ba nakalagay sa classification is snowflake-like sign yung nasa book. 'Di ba dito sa picture makita natin sa screen yung CE1, makita natin na ang snowflake-like appearance natin at dahil may bits-bits. So, hence naman padali na talaga ang diagnosis if mayroon talagang cyst ang ating patient. Next slide po, Max. Next for the treatment, benzimidazole. Next is albendazole. Next is albendazole. So, no treated for minimum of 3 months. Next, referred treatment, surgical resection. Large liver cysts, more than 10 cm in diameter. Secondary infection or cysts in extrahepatic sites. Next is chemotherapy with benzimidazole. So small, this is for small or less than 7 mm in diameter, isolated cysts, uncomplicated cysts, and patients with negative serology response. So for percutaneous aspiration, injection, re-aspiration, or PER technique, so first step is ultrasound guided by percutaneous puncture. Second step is aspiration of substantial amount of cystic fluid. Next is injection of protoscodial agent for at least 10 minutes. Then next is reaspiration. Itong protoscodial agent, guys, ito ay isang diluted na agent. Basta, yan. Diluted agent na ginagamit for PER technique. So, naka-highlight dito is more effective is treatment of PER plus albendazole or mebendazole. So, ang pinaka-effective na treatment is PER treatment for echinococcus plus further medication of albendazole and mebendazole. So, wala man ito sa book, guys, pero siguro nice to know na lang dahil mas mahirap i-treat ang multilocularis or alveolar echinococcosis or yung rodent good ang intermediate host kasi kaysa sa granulosus na echinococcus na species dahil kasi after ng surgery ng multilocularis ng patient, mag-further pa siya ng treatment for treatment ng mga 2 years pa, tapos more likely mas maraming namamatay sa alveolar echinococcus kung i-compare dun sa kanina. So, next slide po, Max. So, next slide, for epidemiology, so most common cystic echinococcosis, so approximately 2 to 3 million cases. Next is human alveolar echinococcosis, 0.3 to 0.5 million cases. So, prevalent in countries such as Southern South America, Mediterranean, Russia, Central Asia, China, Australia, and parts of Africa. Re-emergence in the country of Bulgaria and prevalence of infected canines in the country of Wales. So dito sa prevalent area guys, na example 'di ba, Southern South America, Mediterranean, Russia, etc. Ito ay naka-locate sa temperate zone. Temperate zone guys, baka nasa quiz. Temperate zone ito located. So nakita nyo yan sa picture yung may globe. So ang naka-highlight dyan na green, opo, green, dyan po ang mostly prevalent ang countries na prevalent ang echinococosis. So, note dito, travelers in endemic areas can also be infected. So, example dito, if OFW ang patient na galing sa endemic areas, pwede rin itong magkaroon ng echinococosis. Sa libro, may nakalagay doon na cases of Filipinos na OFW na nagkaroon ng echinococosis. If I'm not mistaken, galing Iraq and Middle East yata. So, walang gilagay paano nila nakuha. Pero siguro ingestion or nakakain ng salad tapos hindi thoroughly hinugasan yung gulay na may embryonated eggs ng echinococcus species. So, hindi rin siguro mata kasi kagaya nga sinabi ko kanina, like matagal pa maglabas ang symptoms kaya very dilemma talaga ito sa part ng diagnosis for this species. So next slide po, Max. So prevention and control. So first is regulate testing, quarantining, and treatment for dogs with parasiquantel in endemic areas. Second, dogs should not allowed in slaughterhouse kung saan sila magkaroon ng interaction with the cattle, goat, or lamb para makakain sila ng raw meat or yung cyst na doon. So next is health education. Most especially is the mode of transmission and dangers of intimate contact with dogs. So for prevention part, importante naman ito na magkaroon in the public health kahit anong disease pa yan. Next is vaccination of livestock animals. Next slide po.
Okay, bilis lang natin kasi malapit na time. So we have Spirometra species. So yung tatlo na yun is example of Spirometra species. We have Ansoni, Ranarum, and Erinaceae. Next slide, please. So we have general morphology for Spirometra. Aspergillosis is yung sakit na mukha parang Spirometra species. We have larval infection with the Pleroceroid larvae, also known as Spargana. Ophidophilia dian tapeworms under genus Spirometra. Ang Pleroceroid po is at Pleroceroid refers to an defective larval stage of several cestoda with aquatic life cycle which is present in the second intermediate host. Then we have is Spargana can live up to 20 years in the human host. So if nasa human daw siya, it can live 20 years, pero pag sa other animals is nag-aabot ng 20 years. Next slide po. So we have casual agents, cestodes in the genus Spirometra, including Mansoni, Ranarum, Mansonoides, Erinaceae, as well as the aberrant Sparganum polyvirium. Involved, yung ipakita ko ganina is, ayun sila yung involved in human, yung Mansoni, Ranarum, tsaka Erinaceae. And, wait lang. Adult of these worms are intestinal parasites of cats, dogs, and other carnivores. So yung adult is usually present sila sa cats, dogs, and other carnivores. So, next slide, please. So ito yung for adult worm can grow up to the length of 1 meters. So ganun siya kataba. The mature poglottids have a general pore and a uterine opening for secreting eggs. In line with the parasite's name, the uterus is spiral. As you can see, yung kanyang pinakadulo is parang siyang spiral. Ang proglottis is a segment of tapeworm containing both male and female reproductive organs. So itong wait lang. Ganyan siya ganun. Okay. Next na lang. So for egg is ano siya, operculate and immature. For operculate means any gastropod mollusk that has an operculum. So what is an operculum? An operculum is a cavity that is empty. The eggshell's chitinous fibers are scattered and loose in its location with the micropores or gaps. As you can see, yung bilog sa taas is yung operculum. So it is an ovoid, measures to 55 to 76 times 30 to 43 micrometer. Spirometra eggs, due to the existence of a unique operculum, they may be mistaken for trematode eggs or Diphyllobitrium species because of their comparable sizes. Wait lang. However, Spirometra species eggs are most likely to float in sugar or zinc solutions than Diphyllobitrium species, and Spirometra species eggs are narrower and anterior than those of the Diphyllobitrium species. Next slide, please. So, ito yung example na galing sa Spirometria erinaceae. Sa infected dog. So, as you can see, yung sa number 1 is number 2 is 3 days after incubation. Wait lang, wala. 3 days after incubation. Number 3, 5 days. Tapos number 4, 8 days. And 15 is the egg after 13 days of development contained fully mature embryo showing hoolets or arrowheads. Then sa figure 6, we can show is egg which is fully hatched out na. Next slide, please. So we have the pathogenesis. So human can acquire spirogenesis by drinking water contaminated with infected copepods. As you can see yung picture sa taas ay yung copepods. Copepods are a group of small crustaceans found in nearly every freshwater and saltwater habitats. Ang second is, mali nakawan man siya. Number 2 is consuming the flesh or undergo second intermediate like frogs, toads, or snakes, or paratenic hosts like wild pigs. That contains a placeroid larvae that result in spirogenesis. So ayun, ito yung picture, yan, makita nyo yan. Meron na yan dyan. Applying fluoroceroid, infected flesh or frogs and snakes or poultices and sores on the eyes, vagina, and skin resulting in subsequent penetration into continuous tissue. So, ang poultices yan. A soft moist mass of material, typically of a plant material or flour applied to the body to relieve soreness and inflammation and keep in place with a cloth. So, ayun yung ginamit niyan dyan. Next slide, please. So ito, migrating spargana can cause various symptoms depending on the final location in the host. Under this, we have spargana may locate anywhere including subcutaneous tissues, breast, orbit, urinary tract, dural cavity, lungs, abdominal viscera, and central nervous system. Ang durations, we have increase in the fibrous elements in tissue, commonly associated with inflammation and marked by loss of elasticity and pliability. Periodic giant urticaria, nasabi nito ni Maxinina, edema, swelling, and erythema, which is type of skin rash caused by injured or inflamed blood capillaries. And highly eosinophilia may be seen in a patient. So eosinophilia is increase of eosinophils. Then we have the inner, if the inner ear is involved, the patient may experience vertigo or deafness. The migration of subcutaneous tissue is usually painless. Patients may complain of painful edema due to migrating larvae known as migrating tumor. When spargana set in the brain or spine, a variety of neurological systems may occur. Occasionally, Sparganum proliferum can proliferate the growth of tissue in the cells, lesions in the affected tissue with multiple fluoroceroids present in the single sites. Next slide, please.
So for the life cycle of the Spirometra species, so first, Spirometra eggs are shed in feces of the definitive host. The definitive hosts are the cats and dogs. Then the eggs embryonate in the water, and the eggs hatch in water and release coracedia, which are ingested by copepods. And then the released coracedia infects the cyclopes and develop into procercoid larvae in the copad intermediate host. Next, the second intermediate host, including fish, reptiles, and amphibians, ingest infected copepods and acquire procercoid larvae. In this stage, the procercoid larvae develop into plerocercoid larvae in the second intermediate host. Plerocercoid larva is also known as sparganum, and it is the infective stage of the Spirometra species. Then the cycle is completed if a predator is an infected second intermediate host. And if the infected tissues of the second intermediate host are ingested by the definitive host, the plerocercoid larva develops into an adult worm. The adult members of the genus Pyrometra live in the intestines of dogs and cats. And then lastly, humans cannot serve as definitive hosts for Pyrometra species, but can serve as paratenic or second intermediate host and develop sparganosis. So next slide po. So for diagnosis for sparganosis is through the recovery of sparganum from infected tissue. The presence of sparganum is diagnostic and identification to the species level is usually not warranted. Species identification can be done through experimental animal infection. The best way is to infect an appropriate definitive host with a living sparganum and identify the adult after maturation. So if i-remove ang sparganum sa infected tissue, ang makita natin are opaque and glistening white, and then they usually measure for about 3.5 cm in length. And when the larvae are flattened, a spatulate collex can be appreciated together with pseudosegmentation and a slit-like invagination at the anterior end. So next po. So ito ang example ng sparganum removed from the chest wall of a patient. So ang figure C, makita natin ang close-up ng anterior end ng sparganum, and ang end niya is thickened and wrinkled and possesses a characteristic of a slit-like invagination. So next. So for the treatment, the main treatment of sparganosis is through surgical removal of the larvae from the infected tissue. Then praziquantel can be recommended, but efficacy to humans has not been proven. For dogs and cats, they can be treated with praziquantel with a dosage of 7.5 mg per kg through per os for 2 consecutive days. And then spirometry species infections in cats can also be treated with a single dose of praziquantel at 30 mg per kg through subcutaneous injection, intramuscular injection, or per os. So yan na po yung last slide, sir.
Okay, sige. Okay. So thank you, group 4. Sige, almost time naman din. Siguro next week na lang na ako magbigay ng yung mga additional na informations and comments sa group ninyo. Parang ano na lang din siya, review. So next Tuesday na lang. Before mag-start ang group 5, okay, i-present ko lang yung screen ko sandali para ma-share ko lang yung mga important na mga infos. Okay, so thank you, group number 3 and group number 4. So very good yung inyong mga reportings. So kung meron bang ano ba mga kailangan i-improve? Very naman siya. Konti lang siya ng mga details, no? So hihintayin ko na lang matapos hanggang group 5 before ko ibigay yung comments ko sa inyo lahat. So, sige, can I have anyone from group number 4 to lead our closing prayer? Ayan, nag-raise ng hand si Maria Villanueva.
Pangalan ng mama ko, sir.
Ay.
Sophia po.
Sophia pala. Okay, sige.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teleo ko si Hirate. We thank you, Lord, for allowing